every circumstance is for awakening, right? Not just this is spiritual and that's not. I'm only spiritual if I'm sitting alone in deep samadhi. That can be really beautiful, but it also can be a real trap where we think that we are evolved in a way that we're not. For me, a measure of someone's spiritual maturity is how they love people.
Hello, hello. It's Christine Marie Mason, your host for the Rose Woman podcast. I generally say it's on love and liberation, but when I look back over the episodes we've been doing, a lot of it is really on listening to people who are giving us tools to live a very inspired life, you know? And today's guest is like that. Spring Washam, who I met in Maui at a gathering of the Ram Dass community, is a Buddhist teacher. She's also a shamanic medicine practitioner. She leads journey work, which we'll talk a little bit about in the show. And unexpectedly, she has been called to write a book on the Dharma of Harriet Tubman. And that combination of looking toward ancient traditions like Buddhist medicine or ancient traditions like the tribal medicine work to achieve more insights, or to spiritual inspirers like those who have walked the path before that can help us lean into a more alive and committed experience to doing what we're here to do, like Harriet. This combination makes for a super interesting conversation. We talk about finding our teachers. We talk about perfecting our love, not perfecting ourselves. We talk about radical honesty, clearing the mental garage. Of course, we talk about Harriet and shamanic work. I know you will find many takeaways in this episode. Thank you for taking the Rose Woman along with you in your day and for being part of the larger community. We get started today by talking about being called to a spiritual path. When do you think you knew in your life that you were destined to really dive deep into this work and enter into these wisdom lineages?
I think I knew when I was really young that I wanted to live a spiritually based life, that I was very drawn to that. And as a teenager, I got into really studying psychology, and somehow I always knew that everything came down to the mind. You know, like something is wrong with our thinking. You know, I can remember having that thought, but not knowing what to do with it, you know, at that time. And as I got older, after my first retreat in my early 20s, I knew that I was committed to liberation. And I think that's where it all starts, you know, with your own commitment to getting free, to understanding truth, to looking within yourself for the answers. I think that was very clear at an early age. And then things just kind of evolve. You know, you let go and life carries you. Initially, we see everything as very separate parts. Right. We think I'm working on this and it has nothing to do with my body or my heart. I just need to fix my mind and my thoughts, and everything's very compartmentalized in the beginning. And I think as you keep going deeper and deeper, you see everything is interconnected. You know, rather we're doing the shadow work, or we're doing deep meditation, or we're working with plant medicine. At the end of the road, it starts to all just become aspects of the jewel. You know, it's like turning a crystal around in different directions. It's all reflecting the same. But I think some way we do compartmentalize when we're approaching healing, because we don't really know what's going on. We're still learning so much. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm learning so much every day. Now I see it as just avenues and roads, and if you just keep following it long enough, you start to catch the thread of all of them.
Yeah, they're like deeply interwoven, as you're saying. And sometimes now it feels a little bit like an atmosphere, that everything is floating in an interconnected, invisible mycelial web of light, and that actually you can't take any single piece out without changing it for the rest. And that did take quite a long time to get there. actually.
Exactly. We see it all as separate. Now at this age, we can go, hey, it's all exactly this interconnected web and everything. Yeah, I love it. That's exactly where we arrive at.
And that does change the way I behave. Like seeing from this oneness, feeling that really shifts the way that I act towards other people and towards circumstances and culture in the world. Like even my activism is now coming out of a different understanding of the unified field. And it comes without an anxiety. Like there's activism without the shadow. So what came first? Did the Buddhism component come first or the shamanic practice?
Oh, the Buddhism component came first. I got very interested in meditation. As I mentioned, as a teenager, I was interested in psychology. And then it was like, well, how do you transform your mind? So then that led me into meditation, right? It was like, okay, if all of this is derived from thinking, then how do I slow down enough to see what it is I'm thinking? How do I become conscious? And that led me very naturally into the path of meditation. And I think it was in my early 20s that I went on my first retreat. I'd been studying in a Hindu tradition of Paramahansa Yogananda school. But there, when he's not alive, though, he's through his materials and his writings and his courses. But at some point I got stuck and I was like, I need a real teacher with real advice. I don't know if I'm doing it right. In that tradition, I would sit for hours, but I had the distinct feeling, wait, I'm just thinking about my problems. I don't know if this doesn't sound like the experience I'm having is anywhere near what Paramahansa Yogananda was experiencing. So then I thought, oh, okay, I need a different approach. I need to learn how to meditate. And I just so happened that I lucked up. I registered for this 10-day retreat in the desert. I didn't know at that time that Jack Kornfield was leading it. I didn't even know that it was Buddhist. People said, go here, you'll learn meditation. There's vegetarian food. You'll like it. It's in silence. And I go, sign me up. I somehow knew if I got to this retreat, things would start to make sense. And I could really say that's when my journey took on a whole nother level, is meeting Jack Kornfield, attending this 10-day retreat, being introduced to the teachings of the Buddha in a way that I could really understand, and then really practicing was a game changer, sort of opened up the path in a whole new way for me.
That's beautiful. For people who don't know Jack, would you like to tell a little bit about him?
Yes, Jack Kornfield. He's probably one of the most well-known Buddhist Western teachers. He's sort of attributed with bringing Buddhism from the East here. He was a monk in Thailand for many years, and he came with a whole wave of Western teachers bringing insight meditation and vipassana, which is a word that means clear seeing, to the West. And then he founded Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. And then he went to school and became a clinical psychologist, and then founded Spirit Rock Meditation Center in North America, in California. And he has gone on, he's written probably over 10 different books about Buddhist psychology and practices of the heart. And he's one of the core founders of Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And he's just a beloved teacher, elder now, mentor to so many. And I was really blessed to meet him at a time where he became kind of like not only my spiritual mentor, but he really became almost like a spiritual father. We had a real bond. And I spent then almost 10 years training with him and moved to that area and began to really train, not only in my own retreats, but then going through years of teacher training.
There's so many threads to pull from that. One is, I love how you were invited to a retreat where you didn't have any idea that what you were getting into, and it's with like the guy.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
like such a grace in and of itself, to be dropped right into that.
Oh, and not only was I on a retreat for the first time, there was 150 of us on this retreat in the desert in Yucca Valley. I'll never forget that first retreat. And somehow I wound up on his interview meeting list. And to this day, we're still like, he was like, where did you come from? Who, usually he works with more advanced, his advanced students. And here I was brand new. And yes, it was, it's like a moment of meeting someone that is going to be a person that changes your life, that impacts your life in a way that you can't really imagine those meetings at the time where these connections and these relationships go. But it was really important, that retreat. And it was so important that him and I actually met and connected, because it did change the course of my spiritual path.
Yeah, and then there's another piece in it, which is you becoming aware that you needed a real teacher, an embodied teacher, and your own willingness to sort of surrender and seek it out and then stay and do deep apprenticeship. That feels like an old-fashioned way of learning that is not so frequently seen right now.
Yeah, it was kind of like the old fashioned. You meet the guru, then you go off to practice for years, and then you touch in, and I agree with you. Now it all feels kind of different now. I think we're just in a different era where there's less faith in teachers, and we've seen all these teachers kind of crashing and the hierarchies and all the ethical issues. I think there's less faith in that, and it's a different time. But there was something very traditional about my journey then. And, that was almost, oh my gosh, 30, almost like 28 years ago.
Yeah. Well, one other thing I was noted about him is he is also uplifting the people that he teaches. I have no sense of ego as you're saying, these teachers who are being toppled, there's kind of an ego story around that. I don't have that vibration at all from him. I have the sense of like his love for the practice, his love for freedom, and seeing other people drop into that. And then how he uplifts his students. He's a mentor that has moved into saying, hey, Spring, this book's great. I'm going to write the preface. I'm going to endorse it. That's so exciting to see, to watch that transition to another generation with seeming transitory joy for you.
Yeah, I have so much gratitude that we are a culture that we need mentors on this path, and we need wise elders more than ever. And I was really lucky that I sort of arrived at a time where there was space for that. It was sort of before he became super famous in a way. There was, I was just right timing, right moment. And I think one of the things that I learned the most from Jack was about the path of the heart and how much love and compassion was really at the center of everything. It wasn't about perfecting ourselves. It was like, we're here to perfect our love. And I remember he used to remind me of that all the time. Like, this is a path of perfecting the heart, of opening the heart, of seeing what's true, deepening our compassion. And that's something that sometimes is not emphasized enough, I think. It is more in the Hindu bhakti world, but sometimes people don't always understand that that's what we're doing, even on a retreat. We're not trying to get something, get concentrated, get to enlightenment. We may want that. It's more of a focus with him was on the heart. And that was just such a deep impression that it just influenced me in every way.
I'm resting on that point on perfecting our love, not perfecting ourselves. That's so subtle and so sweet.
It's a completely different course of action. Yeah, it's like, oh, I'm perfecting my love. Wow, well, this opens up everything as a teacher, every experience.
And it's also an antidote to the I'm a sinner programming of many of us who grew up in a more Christian or Catholic tradition. Because that focus is like that in order to perfect your love, you have to fix what's wrong with you, versus this is not the model. A lot of people, you get a sort of sense of the ubiquitous Buddha sitting up there and on your shelf, staring down at you, the spiritual materialistic idea of the Buddha. But that is, it's not just about this sitting still and meditating, although there's a part of that. There's so much more in the active Buddhist traditions around how to live with other people. I think a lot of the Buddhist transmission that's gone into the public eye, into the mimetic field, is like sitting alone, being serene, meditating, but that much of the teachings that you encounter as you go deeper into this path are about how to live with others, how to lead into community. So maybe we could talk a little bit about practical Buddhism as you experience it.
Absolutely. I think that is such an important clarification about what it is that we're doing, because a lot of times that image of the lone man on the mountain who needs no one, right? Who has left the family, left the wife, and lives in total isolation and wakes up on their own is it's like it doesn't exist anymore. And actually people really don't want that model. And there is something about coming down off the mountain into the village, into real life, into the body. There's a lot of people that I saw on long retreats that sometimes the teacher would say, you need to go home now. You're just getting kind of neurotic, and we can have these blind spots, right? Until we go home. Ram Dass used to say that, right? You think you're enlightened, go live with your family for a few weeks, right? And see what's really there, what's really alive in you still, right? See where the edges are. And I think that that's really what this new generation is really crying out for, is a teaching that embraces all of our humanity, right? How we are in the street, how we are at work, how we are at home, how we are on the cushion. We want to be using every circumstance is for awakening, right? Not just this is spiritual and that's not. I'm only spiritual if I'm sitting alone in deep samadhi. That can be really beautiful, but it also can be a real trap, right? Where we think that we are evolved in a way that we're not. And it really, for me, a measure of someone's spiritual maturity is how they love people. That's it. I don't really care about people who have concentrated states of mind and all these other things. It's like, and then they go out and act mean to everybody. It's like, no, how you love people, how you love the people behind the scenes who are helping you with your car or your, it's a kind of realism now. It's like, if the practice can't meet us there, then a lot of people say, why bother? So practical Buddhism is practicing in every moment. Wherever you are, can I be in this moment? Is it pleasurable? Is it painful? Am I suffering? Am I free? And using whatever is arising as the radical Dharma in that moment.
When you're working with people, what do you find gets in the way of that loving expression? What are the blocks that people encounter the most?
Projections on other people and judgments, right? So when we're in community, what gets in our way is people start judging, looking at people, putting them in comparisons, and this person's wise, this person's not. I don't learn from you. I can learn from you, and that creates a lot of internal blocks, right? We don't know how to love people. We don't know how to love ourselves. So I guess a lot of this is like, we could go back to psychology, is like projecting our own shadow everywhere. There's something I like about Buddhism, if we were to really apply it in its most radical way, is like, whatever arises in me is my mind. Mm-hmm. And we stop looking at others, and, we use the triggers like, wow, I made up a story about this person, and now it's spiraled out of control, right? And we know that's the seeds of violence and anger and jealousy and fear. And so I think that that's a big thing. That's what arises with people, is we start creating those stories based on our own discomfort that's arising in the moment.
Yeah. How many times have you done that? You met a stranger and you assumed all these things about them, and then you later hear something about their journey or what they do in the world, and you're like, I was so wrong.
Yes. It's so humbling.
Yeah. And to give people sort of this graceful passage through your mind, is my mind a safe place for you to be?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the projections and judgment, though, as you said, it takes us back to psychology and into the shadow work. And so maybe that's a good place to start to look at the collective uncovering, like digging up an archaeological site. excavation, that's the word, the collected excavation of the shadow, and how we can, even that used to be, you go into your psychologist, it's a one-on-one process. But now I'm seeing that so much more in a field practice, sitting in a circle, doing group process, sitting in journey space or ceremonial space. And even the excavation of the shadow is less and less an isolated process.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that we're in this time now where, we want to be free. We are becoming conscious that it's our minds, and so to do this work together is even more powerful. And that's the basis for all of my work, is working with the shadow. That got me into the shamanic path, was what is arising in me? And then seeing that in the community. And how do we open to that? How do we meet that? And it takes a lot of courage, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about how you're experiencing that as a leader in these spaces. When people come together and they're willing to look at a shadow situation as a group, or be mirrors for one another in a compassionate way. Like, what is that like? How does that show up in your practice?
Well, it shows up as like a kind of radical honesty, because that only works if each person is willing to take responsibility for their mind in that moment and what's arising in them. Not identify it as, oh, this is who I am, but to identify this is what's real. There's an honesty in this spiritual path. And when people can't be honest, that's where all the masks, that's where all the hiding and the suppression and the danger comes in. But when we can really be honest, then in a group, wow, we can all look at one another together and we can face ourselves. And that's a powerful moment. But we have to be willing, I think, to take full responsibility for our own mind, our own energy, not cling on to it, but to be responsible, to care for it.
Radical honesty requires a fine noticing of the self. And this is where we're doubling back on personal sitting and personal practice. Like, how do I know what I'm saying is true? I know what I'm saying is true when it's like easeful in my body, when it has clarity and energy. I notice the difference in the feeling of what is true. And then I might even be willing to like go another layer. Is this part of my story? And drop down deeper and deeper. But getting to that place of being able to speak from that honesty is also dependent on being back sitting alone, doing Vipassana, confronting your interior life. So what I'm loving in this picture that you're painting is like the self-work, the individual work, and the collective doing this infinity dance. Dropping into oneself, coming back into the whole, kind of in a nice pulsation.
Yeah, the inner work is the collective work when we're really willing to sit with it. I always say that the activist scene, you could say, or some of the challenges is the inner work isn't part of the collective. You see, there they go in the opposite direction.
Oh, right.
Right? Everyone's raging and mad. And like, hey, we have to sit with this within ourselves first, everybody. Our own outrage, our own hurt, our own fear and terror, our own sorrow about the state of the world or what's happening. We can't just expect everybody else to do that. If we can't hold it, how can we expect other people to hold it with compassion? So these two pieces, the inner and the outer, exactly. I love you're making this infinite web of inner and outer. And I talk about this a lot, actually. We go into this a lot in ceremonial spaces and healing spaces. And so sometimes people think that a lot of Buddhists, when they're just sitting alone, that, oh, you guys have abandoned the world. You're on vacation. It's like, no, we're cleaning our minds. This is hard work. You sit with, your rage and sorrow for weeks at a time. It's like cleaning the garage, on such a deep level. You're exhausted, but at the same time, it is fortifying the collective.
I love that. And by the way, I had a friend who the other day just said to me, you can look at your navel anywhere on earth. Like, he was saying it kind of like he's not particularly into self-examination.
Right.
And I find, I find this much nicer to take. I'm cleaning my mental garage, okay? And that allows me to do everything that I'm doing in the world with more as the pulse of love. If I wasn't doing that, you wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like the outcome very much, I mean, it gives me permission to sit without having to produce, also to say that cleaning our mind is a worthy endeavor. It may not look productive to you in the moment, but it actually is incredibly valid and vital.
I think essential. You know, if we don't know what's arising in ourselves and we don't know how to be with it, how would we ever be with the pain of the world? How would we ever be with the pain of another?
Well, I think a lot of people aren't, they're not with the pain of it. That's why the numbness to the pain and suffering that's happening is because we can't hold it in ourselves. And so how can you hold it for everyone else? If I numb out, I paste it over, then I don't act. Just kind of focus on cleaning. Here's a fun fact. Remember when 9/11 happened? The increase in closet organizers was like 2,000%. Like people were so freaked out about what was happening out there and the uncertainty that they turned to like what they could immediately control.
Mm.
And I feel that rather than holding the anxiety of it all cleanly, just got busy doing something else.
Yeah.
I would love to hear how you found Harriet Tubman and who she is to you and how this book came about. So cool.
Yeah, this journey with Harriet Tubman, who I'll say for everybody listening, no matter who you are in the world, what your background, your ethnicity, or gender is your ancestor. First of all, this is one of our great ancestors. Harriet found me. I wasn't somebody who was obsessed with Harriet Tubman. You know, obviously I learned about Harriet once a day every year in Black history studies. You know, they'd mention Harriet Tubman, Underground Railroad. We'd all be like, yeah. And of course, I had studied some of her life, but no, Harriet's arrival into my world and my consciousness in this really deep way in my heart really happened during the springtime, May 2020, when I would say at that period, the whole world was up, collapsing. We had the pandemic, and in California, we had fires, and it was just so epic that time. And Harriet really came through, and I write about this very clearly in a dream where I was being chased, and all this fear was arising with all these murders of people, the police shootings of unarmed Black people, and then George Floyd. And Harriet showed up in a visionary dream a week before that, the death of George Floyd, which kind of was a catalytic moment in the movement. And I always think like there was a crack somewhere in the tectonic plates of our consciousness. And I think of it as a crack of love and compassion. There was something that connected around violence and brutality, and that opened people's hearts. And I feel like that shifted. And I feel like in that crack, Harriet Tubman flew down and then stayed with me, and every day images and songs. And I would feel Harriet's hand touching my hand and giving me the strength to actually be a leader in that moment, because I was collapsed in my own trauma at that time. Like everybody was calling, looking for help and guidance, and I was collapsed. And then when Harriet came, I just felt this deep, deep strength. And I was like, if anybody knows these issues that we're dealing with, it's Harriet Tubman. She knows this energy. She knows this brutality. She knows how to be strong. She knows how to get us out of this, to get us through this period. And the relationship just began to get stronger and stronger. And then I just, like everybody in the summer of 2020, I put out a Zoom class thinking, I wonder if Harriet's talking to other people. And I put out this like 5-week class, Dharma of Harriet Tubman, and the event went viral. So I had hundreds of people in this 5-week Harriet Tubman journey, and it was so beautiful. And then it turned out my publisher was on one of the Zoom, in the sea of Zoom people, that you never see in the back with their camera off. And they asked me if I would write a book about it. And I was like, no way. I could never write a book about Harriet Tubman. I'm a Buddhist spiritual healer. This makes no sense. I don't know. I tried to get out of it. And then, of course, tried to say no to Harriet Tubman. It really doesn't work like that.
I mean, I love that you called the course the Dharma of Harriet Tubman, and you really have this channeled relationship with her, and that it goes so many more levels than this emblematic, we need a token Underground Railroad heroine for, our school classes. This idea of the depth of her teaching, the tenacity of her spirit, and her wisdom transcending the ages and then coming down through you, that's so beautiful. But you weren't a scholar of hers. So how did you close the gap between the transmittal, the perception of her energetic presence and her life? How did you do that?
Oh, well, yeah, that's the question that I had for Harriet the most was like, I'm not a scholar, and you should call, Ta-Nehisi Coates or Angela Davis. This makes no sense to me. But I was willing to do the task, which was to write about her heart. She's like, I have a lot of historical things written about me. I want you to write about my heart and help me to deliver these messages for this time. And so then as I began to have these conversations, I call them sessions. So I don't really channel. People often use that word channel. I guess it's a form of channeling, but it was really conversations, and I wrote and she spoke. So it's not like I could sit down and go, now I will be Harriet Tubman. It's not like that. These were these were really beautiful moments of us going back and forth. And then, yes, for 2 years when we were in lockdown, especially the first year and a half, I studied it was like I was in a course, a historical course. I studied the Civil War. I studied the Constitution. I studied all the slave narratives, the Underground Railroad archives. I immersed myself in a way that I never had. And it was heartbreaking, liberating. It brought up so much. And so I really did that work through that period of time of understanding, how did this happen? How does slavery happen? How does someone like Harriet exist? And then their role now for this time is really powerful. So I think the history is important to understand why we are here, but also like, where are we going?
And her inner qualities that allowed her to persist in her vision of freedom in a time when that was highly unlikely. That's like, how do you stay devoted and focused and clear when the world is feeling a little bit oppressive or a lot oppressive, That's one of the things I find so interesting about the book and the topic, like what she has to say for now.
Yeah, because history really is repeating itself. And many of the things that I was getting and writing about in the book is now coming to pass. Like, there could be another civil war here in this country. That is not outside of the realm of real possibilities, as we're still sort of battling the same energies of, like, who are we going to be? What is this country going to be? Are we going to be love? Or are we going to resort to violence? And so this whole idea of the Underground Railroad and being still alive, that was something that Harriet really wanted me to convey, was that now she's working still as a conductor, but it's the conducting in the mind. See, our bodies are free now. That's like the 3D level. Now we're working on higher levels of consciousness where Harriet Tubman is still conducting, like through the light underground, the inner underground now. And that's really where the battle is, the battle of ideas and mind and ego. And so Harriet's like, I'm still conducting every day, but it's on the inner underground. And it's the same, just as there's a whole pathway, it's a whole pathway through the mind. And that's where they can be found in consciousness now. And so that was a big piece. And I think that most people would begin, if they studied Harriet's life, to begin that Harriet was some kind of a very powerful prophet. Her life was always this flow of this spiritual dialogue happening, this guidance constantly moving her, protecting her, allowing her to move and flow in a way that I don't know what woman could have done all the things that Harriet Tubman did, born into slavery. So there is a part of Harriet that is more like a bodhisattva. I write about that, a awakened being who came to help end the institution of slavery. She fought to end it, and she helped to win that war. So there's a lot of things that we're learning about who Harriet Tubman is, even to this day. More and more documents are surfacing. Like recently, they found her father's cabin in Maryland and his pipes, and records are being old military records are coming out and documents. So it's almost like this hidden things that were once hidden are becoming, as her spirit rises, all of the things about her life are also rising. Old photos they found at the Smithsonian not long ago. It's like, oh, where were these things? Well, now's the time they're emerging, they're being discovered.
I find it really exciting also to hear your distinction between what shows up in material reality, like the body being free, and things that still persist at the energetic or ideal level in sort of the spiritual genome of the culture, that unless they're spoken to, addressed, also liberated, they might initiate a repetition compulsion. That there's something in this so beautiful about the interplay between where we've done something on the outside, but we haven't fixed it on the inside yet.
Exactly. And I think that's what Harriet was said a lot in our sessions. She was like, we abolished slavery. We abolished these laws. Martin Luther King forced the civil rights bill, forced the voting rights. He got it. But a lot of people, they didn't abolish the mind state of segregation, of hatred, of racism, and of slavery. It's just like the outer was done, but the inner was not. So now here we are, right? Back in square one again. As we know, when we don't resolve something, we just repeat the pattern. It's like that's part of karma, right? That's the wheel of samsara, right? It just turns over and over, and we just keep going over the same thing over and over again. But this is on the collective level. A lot of people, they haven't abolished the programming that contributes to this kind of destruction and hatred of beings. So here we are. We get to revisit it again and witness this.
Yeah, devote your life to creating environments where it can be unwound. That's what I feel you're about and we're about. Can you talk a little bit about, let me just say, thank you so much for the book. And thank you for bringing her into a new light and elevating that and taking her beyond the kid's pocketbook of Civil War heroes, famous Black women, to take it into some potency and put her in her rightful place.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So let's talk about the access point of the journey space for unwinding some of this mental patterning and getting into the integrated state of being the love, and how you started doing that and how you're carrying that now and where you're finding it most applicable or useful.
I started working with plant medicine in 2008, where I was introduced to it to treat trauma, right? Even after years of meditation, even being a leader, I started to feel still. After all the yoga and all the wheatgrass and all the blessings traveling around the world, it's like, these patterns were so still deeply in my body, trauma from my childhood, trauma from how I grew up. So I was introduced to the plant medicine ayahuasca by a group of psychologists, a dear friend of mine. And I remember I'd kind of fallen apart a little bit. I was going through this kind of dark night of the soul, and I needed to be strong. We opened a meditation center in downtown Oakland, and I was a leader there. And it was just all this trauma was being triggered, and I didn't know how to be with it anymore. All my strategies didn't seem to be helping. It was such a deep one, it was on the DNA level, right? And so I was invited to do a ceremony with some psychologists, and I did it. And it was so profound for me. And this 8-hour ceremony up in the mountains in California, that I immediately started going to Peru because I wanted to learn where does this plant come from? And what are the benefits of this? I got so much out of it. And that started an odyssey ever since then of me spending 2 months a year in the jungle. And I kept it hidden because at that time it was very, very looked down on. Now we're in a whole nother, what they call a psychedelic renaissance, or, people are seeing all the things that I was saying, in 2008, like this could be so helpful. This could be such a benefit for people with trauma and this could be such an aid. And, it just wasn't the right time then. So I was going and going. I ended up spending a year in the jungle with Shipibo indigenous women healers. And it was after that, finally after that, after training and keeping everything very secretive, that I just decided to start an organization where I blended my two passions, which was Buddhist-based psychology and practice with plant medicine. And I just really came out of the closet with it. And I started holding retreats in Peru, being a public person, doing interviews. I was just trying to tell people that this, with your practice, can be a great benefit of an acceleration point, right? Where we can untangle our confused minds faster, right? We could, it's like it's not easy, but it's a shortcut. But sometimes shortcuts are hard. It's like, I always tell people, it's like the analogy of the mountain. Like if someone said, okay, we're going to climb the top of this mountain. And then someone says, here's the long path. And it's like slowly walking in a straight, maybe a easy path, like around, but this is going to take a long time. But here's another road for those who are daring and ready. This one, you have to hang on this one part, and you might be scaling, and there's no ground at one point, and it's going to take everything you got, but you're going to get there in this amount of time, and you might look at that for a long time and go, well, this is scarier potentially, but I'm going to get there on a whole nother timeline. And I think for all of us right now, the potential of using these meditations and practices and all the practices that we do with the plants is offering us something very valuable. I feel like these are all gifts from Mother Earth. And I think utilized in the right way we need help right now. We need to move a little bit faster. I think that's why they're here. They didn't exist in consciousness a couple hundred years ago, or even 50, right? They weren't even talked about or available a little bit in the LSD world. But, we're talking about really plant medicines that are natural. So this led me on a whole journey, working and combining them all the time with spiritual practice. So I don't just say, here, go do this. It's like, no, you've got to pay attention. Now you have to walk your path with ethics. You've got to continually do integration work. And if you do that, you will find a serious reduction in your trauma. You'll find more joy and more healing. And this is just a big part of my life. And I continue to create spaces where people can work safely with these medicines. If they're prepared and they're ready, they have that compassion for it. I say, let's go. It's part of my work in this world to lead in that way.
Again, I want to compliment you on the lineage. It's similar to the Jack thing. When you knew you wanted to learn, that you went and sat with the Shipibo elders, and you really took it seriously. And you strike me as someone who takes the responsibility of the learning and the knowledge and the tradition to heart, and then carries it out with integrity. And that this even you can do a ceremony and have all of these insights, but the period of not just aftercare, but long arc integration of, am I being accountable to what I experienced in there, is beautiful. There's a piece in the collective conversation too, where a lot of things that one feels as personal experiences and struggles in the individual mind, suddenly when you're in journey space, you understand them at a whole other time scale, a zoomed out perspective. You understand the archetypal battles that are going on in there, or whatever those processes are. And it gives you a reference point that when you do come back into a contracted consciousness, you have something to kind of remember and lean into, that there are so many other ways of seeing. So as you're describing the shrieking, hanging on shortcut, I get that, but also so grateful that I took that shortcut occasionally.
Oh, yeah.
Because it gets me like through those moments of just, I can't go any farther. Oh yeah, you can. Remember that insight you had? But I noticed you're doing a lot of work with BIPOC communities too. Do you think that's different?
Yeah, I think, and I just want to also say absolutely to one of the biggest things that I think for me that I see as a game changer for how people go back into their world or just how they walk on the earth that's fundamentally different is to see the truth of interconnectedness, right? When you feel one with the earth, with yourself, with all beings, and it goes so deep in your cell, right? In your cellular level, in your body, you feel it on every level. It's hard to forget that. Your body remembers that, right? The highest part of you, it's like it changes how you go back in your life. You just shift after that. It's like you part of the mycelium. You see it, right? I am the mycelium. It's very hard to go back into that really deep egoic state. It could be momentary, but there is a sort of background setting that has shifted. You have seen through something. And so that makes me the most optimistic about and hopeful that, we can make this shift, the great turning, to get through this period. Some people might call it the apocalypse, the opening, the Kali Yuga. I mean, there's a million words that we can.
Hopefully not the Kali Yuga, because that's like 80,000 more years. But
it could be,
hopefully the great turning.
Yeah, the great turning. But we don't know. Maybe it's, we just don't know what we're in for here. But regardless, if we're practicing, this is our time. Nothing changes. We practice in the Kali Yuga or practice in the great turning.
That's right.
So yeah, it's interesting. As I started doing this work, I was really called to work with BIPOC folks because of this idea of creating spaces that are safe. I always feel that was my specialty. As a Buddhist teacher, I create safety all the time, creating safety. So safety for people to the psyche can heal. And so because of who I am and the work that I do in the world, I'm really good at creating these safe containers where people can heal deep racialized trauma and the stories that people carry. And that's one of the reasons I'm in Georgia. I'm just a couple blocks from Dr. King's house in Freedom Park. And, and it's like, so I feel like there's a lot of work needed, right? And some people come from this side of the program, right? To overthrow it, the effects of colonization and the suffering of the ancestors. That stuff is real and it needs to be healed, right? And I think I'm uniquely qualified to help with that. I can set a container. I can help shift out of that. So there's a passion around making this available and creating those containers for people to do some of the deepest work of their life in these retreats with other people that are also doing it. So it's like we're doing, and exactly what you said about this collective shadow, taking a group of 25, 30 people and doing this deep work. It just feels very satisfying for my heart. Like, yes.
I think there also this sense of, I could take ayahuasca as a middle-class, middle-aged white woman really easy without risk. Nobody's going to persecute me, but that wasn't the case for a lot of my friends. And the idea that you would just like go off into the woods and take drugs and you'd be safe was not a safe idea. Was not a feasible idea for them.
Yeah. And, we go back and forth about sometimes this idea of only one group of people in a space or other group of people in the space. But I don't know. I just think there's something when we just set these events up where we invite people in, like we're going to do this really deep work, everybody, that people show up and they're ready. If they know it can be held, if they can be understood, if we just need the space to let it go. Right. And the support of helping us, because that's what they don't want to live with this trauma anymore. It's debilitating. It's hell. We all have it. We're all in something that we're battling. And so I just like to create those spaces for people and no matter who they are. When I was younger, I used to teach teen retreats and I held safe spaces for 50 teenagers up in the mountains to do the work they needed to do. Right. And that was their space, or I've led groups for women and that's their space. And I've led, so it's like being a vessel. Not everybody may understand, why different spaces are needed, but sometimes men need to do their work and they need to be with other men. Jack and Michael Mead used to lead a men's retreat every year for 28 years, and he would tell me stories, and I'd be like, they needed to be with the men and do that work, right? They needed to hold each other. And so sometimes I want to invite people to understand why it's necessary and trust that it's a liberation for the collective, actually. There's nothing done in isolation. It's like when we can heal these wounds, your wounds will lessen too.
All right, well, I'm going to get myself together for another deep dive, and you've inspired me. I would love to close on talking on, if you have any advice for me or anybody who's listening on being the love, what that means and how we might deepen into that.
Well, I really think, honestly, at this stage, it really is based on your commitment to it. It's like, I'm going to commit to a path of love. And when we say I'm really going to commit to it, I'm going to be a conductor in my own life. We're all conducting something, right? And I'm going to walk this path, and I commit to using everything. And that's, I really feel like it's about the commitment.
I commit to using everything that happens in my life.
Radical, everything. The neighbors screaming, this happening, the car breaking down, someone stealing our purse, whatever it is, accusation.
I'm gonna love anyway. I'm
gonna see it as a part of the journey, and there's no mistakes, and we're gonna surrender. And I think there's a point where we really make that connection that I'm gonna use it, and then everything that shows up becomes in service of that. And I really believe that's the highest thing that we could do, right? To alchemize and lose an ego identification, all the attachment that we have. And I think I just feel like myself, it's like I recommit to it all the time. I have to remember I'm committing to it, because I forget. Some days I wake up and, I forgot for that day. And the next day I go, yeah, remember this? And that is really the path, is every time you remember, you come back and you remember again and you remember again. And then once you have that memory, everything else makes sense. Your practices that day, how you love yourself, the way you look at your lover, your children, your community. So I really think it just comes down to that, remembering your commitment.
You are always connected. You're never alone. You're in this constant journey of awakening to love. You need other people to do it. And if you do it, it ripples out and changes the world. Kind of goes both ways. So I'm inspired. If everybody would be so kind as to go and grab a couple of the books that this beautiful woman has written, read the journey that she went on, the challenging childhood that she then turned into fuel for becoming this loving entity and teacher. I think you'll also be inspired. And then the new book on Harriet Tubman. And then you have a movie coming out, right?
We have a documentary that we are working on, and there'll be more to come. There's a limited amount on my website, but there'll be more to come. We're working on it.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing that and to seeing what you do next. I remember at the Ram Dass retreat, you were telling so many great stories too. And in the book, there are a lot of anecdotes, not just telling the story of, the Buddha, but also little stories and poems and snippets from people who've inspired you that I think people will also love. So thank you for spending time with me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. It's really been an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're inspired to declutter your own mental garage, to live as the love that you are, to perfect your love, not yourself, to stop trying to dominate your behavior with rules and discipline, and instead change the inner essence of what's driving that behavior. You can find Spring Washam's work at springwasham.com with all of her books and links to her programs. If you'd like to connect with me and get my newsletter called The Newsletter, it's on Substack, and you can subscribe at xtinem.com, xtinem.com. I would love to be in more dialogue with this community. You guys are amazing. Thank you for the nice comments and reviews. I'm enjoying seeing the statistics on our expanded reach in more places, more cities, more countries around the world. And I would really like to be in more interaction, more engagement and conversation. So I think we can do that through the Substack, and I think we can do that through socials. So you can find me personally on socials at the.rose.woman. The show is brought to you by Rosebud Woman at rosewoman.com, where we make gorgeous and exquisite intimate care products for women through all the stages of their sexual, sensual, and reproductive lives, and by Radiant Farms, which is radiantfarms.us, psychoactive gummies for sleep, relaxation, inflammation, enhanced neurological activity, neurogenesis, and opening the heart. May you be the love that you are, or as Patrick Connor, our prior guest, says, may you be an unflickering candle, an unflickering light in the hurricane winds of the world. Thank you so much. All love, all blessings.